Hello, LinkedIn, and welcome to this week's LinkedIn Live and my lovely guest, Irial O'Farrell. And Irial's podcast came out about a week and a half ago. If you haven't listened to the full episode, it is a little bit over an hour. It's a long episode, but I think myself and Irial will agree when we get together, it's kind of hard to stop talking. We have so much ground to cover, and I mean, it's all really, really interesting stuff. So I really appreciate your time both today and on the podcast, Irial. So thank you very much. Do you want to tell people, give them a little bit of a flavour of what you're about, and maybe we can dive into some of the key points then that we talked about on the podcast?
Yep, great. Thanks a million, Aoife, for inviting me on to both the podcast and here to be here with you today. So I suppose what I'm about really is around working with businesses to increase their performance, and whether that's from being clear on strategy, on having the organization designed in a way that helps them maximize their performance. If it's around leadership and the capabilities to lead the organization and individuals and teams to deliver that performance. So it's kind of working. That is my absolute and utter passion. And what I find fascinating is what stops performance in business, and trying to kind of hone in on that, and how do you unblock it, and how do you help the organization to excel. That's about me in a nutshell. So that's been my journey for the last 25 years.
Well, to me, like, I'm a huge fan of your work. Your third book recently came out, and that was what the subject of the podcast was, or at least, and I'm on your email list, and it was like, well, we started by talking about the podcast, by talking about the book, but actually we sort of went in a lot of, we talked kind of around the book rather than talking specifically about the content within the book. But I mean, it made for a really, really great conversation from my perspective anyway. And I think it was really valuable for listeners. Do you want to tell people a little bit about the book? So the book is called The Manager's Dilemma. So maybe start by talking about, like, what is the manager's dilemma?
Yeah. Yes. And likewise, when I was recalling the podcast and I listened to it again, there was a lot of kind of slight tangents, but all to do with the kind of the performance of individuals, teams, organization, and what the blockages can be. And I suppose that brought me to The Manager's Dilemma, and the subtitle being How to Empower Your Team's Problem Solving. And from my own experience of having been a manager, I suppose I kind of happened upon the concept of the idea of the book many moons ago, when I had somebody who was, asking me, bringing me stuff, a team member bringing me things that I was looking at them going, I know you know the answer. Like, why are you bringing this to me? I know you know how to kind of solve this. So it kind of prompted the conversation around why were they doing that, and what was causing it, and what was prompting them to do that. And I suppose it was that reflection on the kind of, clearly they're not comfortable, or there's a kind of a trust thing, or it's a confidence thing, or there's something there that's kind of holding them back. And so in recognizing that, I sort of started, the next time they came to me with something, instead of just giving them the answer, I was kind of like prompting them and asking questions and getting them to to kind of probe them and what they thought. And so eventually it led me to kind of coming at that whole process of, when somebody comes to you with an issue, of changing my approach and coaching them through to how do I want them to come to me with things. So it wasn't that they couldn't come to me with issues, but that they had to have done a certain amount of research, or they had to have their own ideas, or they had to be kind of suggesting what they thought was the best solution, because they were able to. And so I didn't really think an awful lot about it. And then a few years later, I was working with a group of managers, and the discussion was very similar to that sort of process that I had been in myself as a manager. And so I kind of was like, well, hold on, I know this. And I threw out my ideas to kind of maybe an alternative way of coming around to approaching the escalation of issues to them and being overwhelmed with them. And they were like, yeah, no, that actually makes sense. And I suppose the crux of it is that a lot of managers tend to be very good at problem solving. So when somebody comes to them with an issue, they come to them, and the person comes to them with the issue, and the manager immediately solves it because they are good problem solvers. So there's this whole dichotomy of, a lot of times people who move into management are good problem solvers, and often they were promoted because they were good problem solvers. So they were, I suppose they were valued or recognized for their problem solving capabilities. but their role as manager isn't to solve everybody else's problems. It is to enable everybody. And so there's that sort of dilemma or that crux whereby, do I start developing people and enabling their problem solving, or do I continue on solving solving problems? Because that's the value I bring. And so a lot of people will continue solving the problems, not because they mean to, but because it sort of becomes, it's a habit and they don't recognize the pattern.
Well, they're good at it and they probably enjoy doing it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They do. And actually the book does go into the manager's mindset and where their own kind of their own, I suppose, their own mindset to problem solving comes in. And some people love being the center of, I'll swoop in and sort out all the problems, and they get a kick out of it. And it's very hard to give that
superhero complex.
My superpower is so it's very hard to give that up then when you see that as your superpower. So it kind of gets into some of the manager's own mindset and how that might be playing into the dynamics.
I think, I mean, from everything that you're saying there, and we did touch on this on the podcast, it's almost from both perspectives. So from a manager's perspective, how do you take that step back to enable and empower people to solve their own problems? But then, that in itself gives people the confidence to be able to do that. So whether it's they're coming to you because they lack the confidence to do it, even though they know the answers, they kind of lack the confidence to actually execute on it. And I have in the past have people who I've been managing where they come to you double checking everything, and it's kind of like this is kind of almost doubling up on my time and your time by having us kind of check everything to the point of like, let's take the hands off, let's take the foot off the pedal a little bit and give you, kind of take the what is it, the stabilizers off the bike and let you go on your own, because it's not a life or death situation. If things go wrong, then it's an opportunity to learn from that. And I suppose creating that environment where people feel trusted and enabled and empowered to be able to do that, I think makes a huge difference. And one of the really startling things, Irial, was the time that you talked the time element that kind of builds on what I was just saying now, the time element that you were talking about. Do you want to share a little bit about the kind of eye-opening, like if this takes X amount of time, then this is how much it means in a year?
Yeah, so this is a technique I use with managers when they're going, I don't have time to do that, I'm too busy. So I get them to work down through the numbers of, if you take a 10-minute task that you do every day that you're not supposed to do, or a 60-minute task that you do once a week that really you're not supposed to be doing, but you do it for whatever reasons, you've taken it on and you keep doing it.
It's easier, it's quicker, it's, I know how to do it.
I never handed it over when I was promoted up, so I kept it with me. That's often how it happens.
It'll take me longer to explain to someone else how to do it. All of the reasons that we use to kind of keep stuff within our own remit.
So you do the numbers and it works out, 10-minute task every day is about 50 minutes or 60 minutes if it's a weekly task. So you do the numbers and it works out at something like 40 hours a year over a year. And you take the time, you calculate the time, how long would it take me to train the person on the 10-minute task? And it takes about 10 minutes on a 10-minute task, like really thorough training, 30 minutes. You might do 20 minutes the following day, and you might sit with them while they do the task for 10 minutes the third day, which turns out to be an hour. So it's an hour versus 40 hours. And it might take a little bit longer if it's a 60-minute task and you break it down over a bit longer period. But basically, for 1 hour investment or 2 hours investment, you can buy back 40 hours, 38 hours over the course of the year. And you go, that's one task. You multiply that out of the 20, 30, 40 tasks that really probably shouldn't be sitting on your desk. And all of a sudden, you've gained back a huge amount of time.
I mean, there's so much coming out. Like the first thing I think is, well, that's an extra week's holidays for, if someone wants to take that, if you just took that completely out, that's an extra week or an extra week of work. If someone wants, if that's kind of how you want to dedicate your time, whatever it might be. But there's so much coming up for me, and I've seen things. This is since we recorded the podcast, talking about time blocking and that sort of stuff. And when we tend to have those little snippets of time, like if I think of my phone and the notification I get on a Monday morning to say how much I've used, I'm pretty horrified. I think the first time I got the notification, I was like, oh, wow, 6 hours over the course of a week, that's like, what, 45 minutes a day? It's not too bad. And then I realized actually it's 6 hours per day over the course of 7 days, which is a pretty horrendous statistic. I'm trying to get it down, and it kind of fluctuates down to about 4 hours, up to, I think I got to 7 hours one time. But that's all in little snippets of time. And if you can save yourself those little snippets of time by not doing those little snippets, it all adds up. And then use the rest of the time in kind of blocked modes. And Paul Murphy has commented there saying, great book, subject, a super person. Well done, Irial. So thank you so much for your comment, Paul. We covered so much. One of the things I think that we got a little bit tied up on was this idea of where things should sit. So you kind of mentioned just there that, like, well, I got promoted and I never handed over the task that I was doing. And we did spend a good bit of time. So if anyone hasn't listened to the full episode of the podcast, the link is in the comments if you want to listen to the full episode. It is over an hour. We're only going to be chatting here for like 10 or 15 minutes. I'm just kind of doing a synopsis, sharing some of the insights from the podcast. The full link is below, or you can get it wherever you listen to podcasts. So Irial, we kind of talked about where tasks actually sit, and like where they should sit and all of that. Could you want to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I suppose because I have a background in organization design, where you're designing functions and you're designing organizational roles and you're designing levels within functions and what the purpose is, and that it kind of is really interesting then when you apply it to jobs and performance, and I always take the perspective of performance. Your performance management, performance development is focused in on, are you able to deliver the role that has been designed that you're in? So if you're not clear around what the role is about and what the tasks are and what the outputs or outcomes are of that role, it's very hard to, I suppose, stay in lane, for want of the better word.
Dare I say that there's probably a lot of people today that are listening that are not really clear. And this is something, it kind of comes up in a roundabout way on the podcast a lot, about focusing on outcomes and performance and things like that. But being really clear, and as a leader, being able to translate the vision and being able to give really clear directions to people, but also give them the autonomy to be able to go and do their jobs. But like there could be a lot of people listening, and I know it's a really common problem, that they're not really that clear on what the expected outcomes of the role actually are.
Yeah, and it if you go into management, it's a bit clearer when you are in roles where you're doing the work of the organization. But when you're managing the work of the organization, it gets less clear and less clear and less clear. And the more senior you get, the less clear it becomes, because there's less clarity around what does leading mean, what does managing mean, what does ensuring mean, what does kind of oversight of, or whatever these sort of general words are. So it becomes harder and harder. And a lot of times you're talking to managers in organizations, you're going, what's the purpose of that level of management or that level of leadership? And even there isn't clarity on that. So part of the, I suppose that part of performance is, when we're talking about performance, it's if you think about an organization is a system. And if we don't know what the purpose of the different parts of the system is, it's hard to know if the system is working, or if the system isn't working, it's hard to know what parts are going wrong with the system.
Or if you just take out that whole level of management, then what happens to the organization, and do we know what's going to happen? And so, and again, even with the developing of people, managers are, different levels of management, they're not particularly clear around what is it I expect out of that role, or what is that role designed to deliver. So the clearer we are on that, the clearer we can actually say, well, this is what this role is about. This is what this role should deliver. These are the skills and knowledge and capabilities that this role requires. And even, you sometimes get it even with organized in teams, in functions, whereby it might be like there's a level, and then there's like a senior level, or there's a junior level, and there's very little clarity around what does if this is X role, what does the senior X version of this role look like? The difference between it's just that they have more years of experience, and therefore they've become senior, but they're essentially doing the same role. is the expectation that they'll deliver to a higher level, a higher quality, faster? What is the expectation?
What is the expectation? More complexity, more difficult, more complex accounts, more whatever it is. And oftentimes even that's very hard for managers to articulate what the difference is, or the organization as a whole. When I say managers as a proxy for the organization, like if the organization, what's the difference? They're going, I don't know. And then that starts leading to kind of, I suppose, disengagement and conflict, because people are going, well, why can't I get promoted? Or what is it I need to do to improve to get to that level? Or where do I need to get, what do I need to develop? Or what experience do I need to get? And because there isn't that clarity, the managers, I don't really know.
This all sounds very familiar from thinking back to my corporate days, and wanting to always get to that next level. But again, the managers weren't really clear, and I have to refer back to the job description. But the job description is not clear about what the difference is either. So
no. And then sometimes what you end up with is
a higher level, because this is, my experience is X, Y, and Z. Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is that people get promoted up into roles because it's like, well, we want to keep them, or we don't really know what to say to them.
Oh, the politics. Don't get me started on the politics.
And you end up with loads of different levels and with nobody clear around what the purpose is. But then it's very easy when we don't really know that the more we go into management and the more we go into the higher level roles, because it becomes less clear, it's less tangible. Like the outputs of a manager's role is an awful lot less tangible than if you're delivering a project, or you're delivering, making produce. It's a lot harder to kind of, what is the tangible outcomes or outputs of this role. And so what often happens is they'll kind of because they're not really sure what they're supposed to be doing, so they sort of kind of keep doing parts of the old role. So it's almost like they're bringing parts of the old role into the new role. And because nobody's really clear, there's no real discussions around, well, actually, that's no longer your job. Your job is now this. And so nobody ever has that conversation. And so the different pieces of work, different tasks, different processes end up sort of all over in different roles as a result from maybe what was the original intent of the
And I know, I can't remember what it was at that specific podcast that we addressed it on, but like just talking about how much that costs a business when you're doing that work at different levels. So if you're at a more senior position and you're doing a role or some tasks that can be completed at a lower level, the differential in how much that actually costs the business as well. And I know that, like, I mean, for me, maybe it's the $1 million question is, well, what do we actually do about that? Is the answer, well, you need to hire Irial to come and work in your organization to work with you? What is the answer to that?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've done, which I touched on in the podcast, is this concept of role dimensions, where it's actually kind of breaking out what is the expectation of different roles within a job family, and then you can kind of also compare it to different level, the same level of management in different functions. So is there different expectations, or are they the same? Obviously, they should be relatively the same. If you've got a manager level in one function, the expectation should be reasonably similar to a manager level in another function within the organization. So it allows you to calibrate that as well, so that you have a kind of similar understanding, and all managers at a level have that understanding. But also within job families, people have an understanding of, as I progress and develop, and as I, look at my career development, I can see how this role evolves into that role. And senior levels, you needed to bring in business, do networking, so they could see that, okay, if I start kind of putting out on social media, that's the start of my building out those skills into development, business
raising
development,
awareness, getting leads,
So they could see how it connected with their future career, maybe not their current job, but it would connect to their future career, and they could now see the importance of it.
Brilliant. No, love it.
That's
We're coming up on 20 minutes. As always, Irial, I think we could probably stay here for another couple of hours chatting away, but in the interest of time, and for people who are tuned in live today or watching the replay, if you haven't listened to the full episode of the podcast, like I said, it is in the link should be in the comments, or it's available wherever you get your podcasts. It's on YouTube, it's on Apple and Spotify and Google, and wherever you listen to your podcast. So thank you so much again for your time today, Irial. Any kind of final parting words that you want to leave for people?
No, but well, I suppose what I will say is, if you do find yourself as a manager getting inundated with people in your team coming to you with can you sort this, and you look at this, I've got a problem with this, can you help me with this? Definitely get a copy of The Manager's Dilemma.
Yes. Yeah.
Very insightful and
100%. Yeah.
a practical way to change the dynamic.
I read it. I don't manage people, technically speaking, anymore, but I will be in the future. And it's it was a real eye opener. It's a really, really practical guide as well. Actually, one last final parting word from me. The podcast has recently hit 45,000 listens. So for anyone who has listened to the podcast up to now, I really, really appreciate that. Should be hitting around 50,000 in July time, so it'd be a big celebration for that. Really can't wait for that. Thank you everyone for tuning in live today or watching the replay. We really appreciate your support. Thank you, and I will talk to you again soon.
Take care. Bye, Aoife. Well done on the podcast.
Thanks.